it's a beautiful piece of writing, and you can use it. I mean, go look it up and use it, because it says, if I should need a word, he will give it to me. If I need a thought, that will he also give. If I need but stillness and a tranquil, open mind, these are the gifts I will receive of him. He's in charge by my request. He will answer me because he speaks for God, my Father, and his Holy Son. So this piece is saying, like, no matter what I need, I can turn within. There's a source within me. Here they use the masculine pronouns. Sometimes that's a hurdle for some people studying the course. But again, they're just symbols, and I've come to the point where we just really need to honor the masculine and the feminine as it comes to us. This holy pronoun, do I give to thee, be thee in charge? You know, like, I can't make up a whole bunch of things about it. It's holy. So anyhow, so this is the last lesson, and for me, it's a cure-all. The story behind this last lesson is that Ken Wapnick was studying a course. He was going out to bring it to a community. He was really nervous about bringing it to a community. He wasn't a great speaker. He actually he had a stutter. And he went to the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit directed him towards this. It said, if you need a word, I'll give it to you. If you need an inspiration, I'll give you that too. Like, just make sure that love is in charge, and you'll be guided where to go, what to do, and what to say. And my friend Joe Wolf, who some of you know, who had a prison ministry here in the Chicago area, he would use this every time before he gave a talk, before he did a workshop. He would just take a moment and he would say, this holy instant do I give to you. And I always remember it as a very powerful piece of writing. So when we talk about taking a breath and being still, the other lesson that we studied today was, I will be still, and the grace of God will be given me. And so when you hear this in every theology and philosophy, before going to God, it says you got to slow down first. We're running, and it says be still, and then you can receive all of the goodness and the grace. So I'm gonna just do a little experiment here. We're gonna see what 30 seconds looks like in just stillness, not a meditation, just in being with each other. What would it feel like if we were just here? Today's lesson asked us to look around the room, let our eyes fall on whatever it will, and say to each thing, I've given all the meaning this has for me, which is an interesting practice. Basically what it does is it brings us to the moment, and you start looking around your house and you're like, wow, nobody's dusted in a while. But it also just brings us here. So for 30 seconds, you could look at your hands, you could look around the room, you could get curious about this experience, you could check in with the fan, you could check in with the noises, you could check in with how the light is falling on things. We're just going to be here for 30 seconds, and here we go. Bless you. So that was 30 seconds. Sometimes we say, I don't have time to slow down and contemplate the direction of God. But that was like a year for some of us, wasn't it? It was like, when is she going to be done with this experiment? And in that experiment, we get to feel. We experience a little bit more intimacy. We experience a little bit more vulnerability. We get to experience patience, what patience looks like when we allow ourselves to just move into stillness. And sometimes these are the very things that scare us. Like, we kind of put off being patient or intimacy or visibility or vulnerability. Like, these are things that we try and keep busy so we don't have to feel. There is a quote from one of my favorite theologians. His name is Frederick Buechner, and he says, what we hunger for, perhaps more than anything else, is to be known in our full humanness. That's a great hunger of humanity, to be known in our full humanness. Do you see me? Do you hear me? Am I being seen? Am I being heard? Am I being present? So how do we get to our full humanness? We find and honor our truth, our voice, our stories, and our silence. We find and honor those things. So how do we honor our stories and our situations? The first step, acceptance. 12-step tells us all the time, acceptance is the answer to all of our problems. Accept the facts of your life as perfect, or at least accept the facts of your life as the key ingredients for your most magnificent next step. You know, when Maureen's doing this ministry for, you know, celebration of United Nation, and we think about freedom, like there was a long time, I think, in your life where you didn't have that experience of creative freedom. And now it's like you're using your creative freedom and bringing forth this ministry, but I don't think it would be as palpable and as powerful for you if you hadn't spent so much time not being expressed. You know, so those were the ingredients to this moment. You know, I sent in a manuscript recently, so it's sometimes the endings are the beginnings. And we think the endings are the endings that are going to kill us, but sometimes the endings are the beginnings. And I sent in a manuscript recently that's coming out in November, and the beginning of the story starts with an ending. It says, the end is an odd way to start a story, but it was actually the end where it began. It's funny now because I didn't know it was the beginning. I would have bet everything that I had that this was the end. You know, it's sort of like what the caterpillar, you know, calls the end. Then comes the butterfly, and little did we know that that lived within the butterfly. So we want to say this is not where, when we see the ingredients of our breaking away or falling down or falling apart, we say, wait, this can't be right. I don't want to accept this. You know, this cannot be where my greatest beginning begins. This looks like an ending. And I'm supposed to make something of all this brokenness? Like, how am I supposed to do that? And so we struggle with the facts that are. We struggle with the situation at hand. And instead of embracing it and saying, yes, this is, I will use this will be my catalyst, not my crucifixion, we start to make up stories about it. So this holy instant is where you determine that you will not be defined by your current situations. You know, that you're not going to get stuck on the current events. The current events will ebb and flow. You know, you look at the news any given day, there's the yes and then the no, and then the yes and then the no, and things are looking good. And then if you stay on the current, you're going to be like a yo-yo. So we got to go deeper. And start just accepting that whatever it is, we can take that, we can use that. That is the exact ingredients we need to turn this into something magnificent. You know, the sand is the key ingredient to the pearl. But the oyster doesn't want the sand. You know, if the oyster could reject the sand, it would. But it can't reject the sand, so it has to work with it. And it's able to turn that sand into a pearl. And that pearl is one of its most worthy offerings to the world. So the question is, what's the sand? Like, what's the grit in your oyster that you're not really willing to accept, that you want to spit out, that you want to say, no, not today? You're not going to get past that. We have to work with that. Once the sand is accepted, then and only then do we have the opportunity to make it holy. Anything that we don't accept, we've deemed it as unholy. And in that kind of mentality, we start living in a very fractured world, and our world gets smaller and smaller. Instead of saying, okay, come to me. Embrace these little broken places. Embrace these little agitations. Let me see how I can transform this into holiness. It's not against you. It's actually a call for love, and the love comes through you. So it's actually a call for you to see a greater possibility for yourself. So I don't want to say you want to welcome all the sand in, but you definitely don't want to judge it or spit it out. So once the sand is accepted, we can work with it, allowing in this holy instant. Now, we don't make the holy instant. The holy instant already is. It already is. It's waiting patiently for us to stop kicking the sand out. It's just, it's always been there. It waits patiently for us to be one with it. As long as we're wrestling with what is, or wrestling with what was, or wrestling with what will be, we're distracting ourselves from the holy instant. So we get to decide, are we going to be in peace with this? And then from that place of peace, create something awesome. So we always practice returning to the source. I give this back to you, God. Even, especially if it's agitating. You know, we hear so many times, you know, if something's agitating for you, then offer it to the Holy Spirit, because you're not doing this alone. You know, the oyster might think, oh, I'm all alone. I got to turn this into a pearl. I don't see how that's going to happen. But for us, we know we're conscious beings. We know that we have a posse of spiritual way showers surrounding us, that we have an internal compass that we could go to that says, you know, I don't know what to do with this. This is causing me agitation. I'm a child of God. I know that I am not here to be agitated or feel separate or have scarcity. So show me how this is for me. Those are really awesome words to hear me say. When you use them on your own life, it's amazing. In a 12-step, we hear this 3rd-step prayer that says, God, I offer myself to thee, to do with me and build with me as you will. Relieve me from the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will, And then it says, take away my difficulties. That victory over them will bear witness to those that I would help of your power, your love, your way of life. So even in this prayer, 12-step, it's saying like God's not invested in your struggle. Like you could ask God to relieve you of that so that you can be a happy calling card for the divine. So what you're called to do, you don't have to do in stress or struggle. I've said it a million times before. I'm going to continue to say it. God's not looking for martyrs. We're looking for miracle workers, and you are the people to do that. So we've been given this moment not so that we can make anything of it. We've been given it simply to experience, to give thanks for it, to return it, and to say, what would you have me do with this holy instant? If we take it too seriously, we'll start to build a hell out of these little breadcrumbs, these little perspectives that we don't have the whole story. So these agitations, these angers, these indignations, if we hold on to them, they will block the holy vision. And we'll find ourselves feasting on these crumbs of yesterday. And we'll take all of this fodder and we'll build on it and we'll stoke the fire with it. And to stoke the fire, we're going to have to throw in all of our dreams, all of our desires, and all of our dearest relationships so we can keep this crucifixion alive, because that's what it's going to take. So we don't want to do that. That's not the story or the way we want to go, right? We want to give it back up to God and say, I know I'm not here to struggle. Let me see this differently. And the one way we can say, let me see this differently, is by removing our judgment from the situation. That's why that first lesson is kind of important when they say, I've given everything all the meaning it has for me. Even when you say, I was hibernating in my house, you can make a lot of meaning of that. Like maybe people shouldn't be hibernating in their houses, but you know what? Maybe that's perfect. Maybe that's the amount of time you needed to resurface for your next right chapter. So it's interesting, all of the meaning that we give to things. This past week, I had a little dream that was kind of disturbing, and in it, I saw somebody I loved in an accident, and he was a bicyclist, and it brought to my mind this experience that I had one day when I was in New York City. And I was in New York City, I was walking to an audition, and I saw this big crowd forming. And I walked over to the crowd, and I was like, hey, what's going on? And I stood in the circle, and all of a sudden I noticed in the middle of the circle there was a young man there. He was a messenger. He had a messenger bag on him. He had a bike that was completely twisted, and he was alive, but his face was almost gone. And he was looking around the crowd, and we were all looking back at him like you would, like, oh! Like a horror movie in the middle of a New York street. And he kept looking at us and he was saying, what are you looking at? Tell me what you see. Am I okay? What are you looking at? Tell me what you see. Am I okay? And everyone in the circle was shocked and no one was saying anything. I was about 20 at the time. I just wasn't equipped for the moment. This businessman came in beside me and he went right into the middle of the circle. And he put his hands on the guy's leg, and he looked him in the face, and he said, hey, you had an accident? You're really bloody. You're in shock. You're gonna be okay. You're gonna be okay. And his voice was so strong, and it was so convincing that not only did he heal the mindset of that child in the middle of the circle, but I looked around the circle, and I saw everyone else go, oh my God, we needed to hear that. We all needed to hear that he was going to be okay. And because we heard it from some warrior who was able to speak a truth that was not available in that moment, we all said yes to it, because that's what love would have us do. It was like fear just started to slip away from the experience, and suddenly we were living and holding a miracle for someone's son that we didn't know. So that's what it can look like. We could be that guy. You could be that miracle worker that walks into the darkest places of hell and says, not today, not on my watch, this is going to work out for you. We need more people like that. So there was another story that I saw, funny enough, this past week, a woman named Janine Shepherd, and it's on TED Talk. So if you watch TED Talks, it's really a great TED Talk to watch. But Janine Shepherd was another cyclist. And she was riding her bike, and she was going to the Olympics. She was doing such a great job. They called her Janine the Machine. And she was pedaling up the hills in Australia on the Blue Ridge Mountains. And she was having this experience where she just was on fire. And she had about 10 minutes left to her training. And she was looking up at the beautiful sky. She was with her team. And all of a sudden, everything went black. And the next thing she knew, she woke up in the hospital almost every bone in her body was broken. And not only was she not going to the Olympics, but she wasn't going to walk again. And this was what they were telling her in the hospital. And she was devastated because her mind couldn't wrap around that story. That was her holy instant. That was a holy instant, believe it or not. So she's in the hospital, and she's with like 5 other people in the, what's it called? Where they fix your back. It's a ward that's just about working with your stem, your backbone. So she's there with about 5 other people, but none of them can see each other because they're all laying on the bed and they're talking to each other about their stories. And the nurse comes in and she gives them each a pile of straws that she lays on their belly, and she says, start connecting those straws. She says, they start connecting the straws, and then the nurse says, okay, now I'm going to connect all of your straws. You can't see each other here, you can hear each other's voices, but I want you guys to know you're not alone. You're all in this story together, and all of you together can move past this. You're gonna be friends. This is gonna work out. So the nurse told her when she was leaving the hospital, when you go home, you're gonna be really depressed, and because you won't be able to walk. And Janine was like, I'm never depressed. I'm Janine the machine. I am gonna walk, you know. And they said, no, it's not a possibility. So she got home and she went into this depression. And but she still tried to get herself up, and she would call her friends over, and her friends would help her walk on either side of her, and then she kept doing it, and then it was just one friend, and then she was moving around the furniture, and then she was holding herself up on the wall, and she was actually getting herself to walk again. And one day she was sitting outside her house in a wheelchair, and she looked up, and she was lamenting her position, and she looked up and she saw this plane fly overhead, and she was like, I am never going to really walk again. I'm probably never going to run, and I will never ride my bike the way that I was supposed to ride my bike. That will never happen. She said, but that doesn't mean I can't fly. So she signed up for flight lessons that day. She was still in a partial body cast, and she went in for flight lessons, right? She goes in, and he's like, can you work the pedals? She's like, no, I can't, but I'll figure it out. Somehow she passes the physical to allow herself to get this license as a pilot. She keeps going. She ends up getting her license as a pilot. She loves it. She falls in love that she's found this new idea of flight. And then she goes back and she decides, you know what? I could fly. Now I'm going to do tricks. She becomes this well-known acrobat pilot, and she does all these tricks. She wins awards, and then she does something even more wonderful. She goes back and she teaches people how to fly. And she does that within 18 months of her accident. I don't even know how that's possible, but that was her holy instant. It sure didn't look like a holy instant that took her to such great flights. When she first took the wheel, the very first time, the pilot said to her, here, take the wheel, you're gonna steer. Do you know she flew right over those mountains? Those same mountains that she was driving on her bike. So I tell you that story because I want you to remember in the dark nights that this could be the beginning. You know, this could be the very beginning. It's not necessarily the ending. There's a holy instant that you've experienced already. Many of you have experienced several holy instants where you got, you know, whacked in the side of the head and you thought, what was that for? You know, there's a holy instant, the one that hit you with a spiritual 2x4, and you think, oh my God, that was going to be lights out. And you know what? It wasn't. It was lights up. That's what that call was. It was lights up. It was like, you're going to light up from this. You're going to light up the world. That's what that was. That's what that is for all of us. So this is not your end. This is your beginning, disguised as your ending. Don't be fooled into thinking that this is the ending. Take a breath. Offer that ending to God. Remember that you are never alone. You are never forgotten. That all the world conspires on your behalf. Let go of the judgment and the vengeance that tether you to yesterday. Recognize who and whose you are. You can indeed afford to laugh at fearful thoughts, knowing that God goes with you wherever you go, and God is not done with you yet. This hot, beautiful morning is your great beginning. And that's the word.